On my monitor, the world was ending, or at least it was seriously considering it. Director Thompson's face, a constellation of worry lines and institutional gray, filled the encrypted video feed. He looked like a man who gargled with gravel and flossed with bad news. Today was no exception. And the satellite imagery confirms it, Alex. 3 of their destroyers have broken formation and are making a hard turn toward the strait. The carrier group is holding position, but the Iranians are testing us. This is a potential blockade scenario. I nodded, trying to project an aura of calm, focused analysis. The intelligence from Station Kilo will be critical, sir. We need to know if this is posturing or prelude. Paramount, Thompson grunted, which is why your brief needs to be on my desk, and the President's, by 0800 tomorrow. This can't be late. Understood, Director. Crystal clear. It was, in fact, anything but clear. My focus was split, my professional calm fraying at the edges, because as Director Thompson outlined the potential for a global superpower confrontation in the Strait of Hormuz. A far more immediate and, in some ways, more terrifying conflict was unfolding on my front lawn. Her name was Brenda. Through the window of my spare bedroom-turned-command center, I could see her. She was on her hands and knees, a position I'm sure her ex-husband wished on her daily. But this was a holy crusade, not prayer. She had a bright yellow tape measure stretched from the curb to the base of my mailbox post. Her brow was furrowed in the kind of intense concentration usually reserved for bomb disposal experts or squirrels navigating a bird feeder. After a moment of careful measurement, she scribbled furiously on a clipboard, her lips moving silently, likely reciting some arcane passage from her sacred text, the Harmony Creek Estates, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. On my screen, World War III was brewing. Outside my window, a 50-something woman in pristine Lululemon activewear was preparing to declare war on my mailbox. I wasn't sure which threat to take more seriously. Thompson was outlining naval fleet movements. Brenda was assessing my property for crimes against visual harmony. Alex, are you processing the gravity of this? Thompson's voice sharpened, cutting through my domestic distraction. I snapped back to the screen. Yes, Director, absolutely. Gravity processed. It's just, I have a developing situation on the ground here as well. A potential domestic insurgency. Thompson's left eyebrow, a caterpillar of pure skepticism, crawled up his forehead. What? Threat appears to be localized, and armed with a tape measure, I said, my voice deadpan. I think I can handle it, sir. He stared at me for a beat, probably wondering if the stress had finally cracked my brain like a cheap ceramic pot. He decided, as he always did, to ignore any data that didn't fit his mission parameters. Just get it done, Alex, 0800. The feed cut out, plunging my office back into silence, save for the hum of my encrypted server array. I swiveled my chair and looked out the window again. Brenda was now using a small level, holding it against the side of the mailbox itself, her head cocked. She shook her head with a look of profound disappointment, as if she'd just discovered a fundamental flaw in the fabric of the universe. She stood up, brushed a non-existent speck of dirt from her yoga pants, and marched back toward her own home. A beige McMansion identical to mine, but with a lawn so green it looked like it had been hand-colored by a cartoon-obsessed deity. She walked with the grim satisfaction of a tax auditor who'd just found a gold mine of fraudulent receipts. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. I had to analyze telemetry data from a spy satellite, cross-reference it with human intelligence reports from a deep-cover asset, and write a summary that could influence global policy. But first, I had to survive the HOA. The next morning, my fears were laminated. Taped to my front door, shimmering with the smug authority that only plastic-encased paper can convey, was an official HOA violation notice. It wasn't just a letter, it was a dissertation. a multi-page, full-color document that detailed my mailbox's heinous crimes against the community. Brenda, it turned out, was not just an enthusiast. She was a Michelangelo of petty grievances. The document, titled Notice of Non-Compliant Curbside Mail Receptacle, cited Section 4, Subsection B, Paragraph 7 of the CC&Rs. It included high-resolution photographs taken from multiple angles, complete with helpful red arrows pointing out my transgressions. My list of violations was as follows. Improper setback. The mailbox post was, and I quote, a staggering 1.5 inches further from the authorized curb line than stipulated. The audacity. Unapproved finish. The post and box were painted in a common and visually abrasive semi-gloss black, whereas the bylaws clearly mandated a community-approved, light-absorbing satin finish in the exclusive shade of Midnight Shadow. Non-standard flagging mechanism. My mailbox's little red flag, the universal symbol for I have sent a letter, probably a bill, was apparently a renegade. It was a flat, paddle-style flag, which, according to Brenda's notes, creates a jarringly angular profile, disrupting the gentle, curved aesthetic of the Harmony Creek streetscape. The notice concluded with a chillingly polite ultimatum. I had 7 calendar days to rectify the aforementioned violations, or face a daily fine of $50, plus the potential for a lien being placed on my property. I stared at the letter. A lien on my house. Because my mailbox flag was too angular. This woman was a weapon of mass destruction in a visor. Letter in hand, I did what any rational man pushed to the brink would do. I marched across my perfectly manicured, per HOA regulations, lawn, onto the sidewalk, cracks and imperfections to be reported via Form 7B, and across the street to Brenda's house. She was there, of course, tending to her garden. Her petunias were flawless, a riot of pink and purple so uniform they looked like they'd been manufactured in a factory and installed that morning. She was misting them with a small spray bottle, cooing softly. "Brenda," I said, holding up the laminated document. It felt like I was presenting evidence at a war crimes tribunal. She turned, her face a carefully constructed mask of pleasant surprise. "Alex, good morning. Beautiful day to be in compliance, isn't it?" "Brenda, it's a mailbox," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "The mail goes in, the mail goes out. It's been this way since I bought the house 5 years ago. What is the problem?" She finally set down her mister and gave me her full attention. It was like being examined by a particularly judgmental owl. "The problem, Alex," she said, her voice dripping with condescending patience, "is that rules are the bedrock of a harmonious community. They protect our property values. They ensure a certain standard. It's a standard I've apparently been violating for half a decade without a single complaint." "An oversight," she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "One I was happy to correct during my quarterly compliance audit. If we let one mailbox slide, what's next? Unapproved lawn gnomes?" She shuddered theatrically. "Satellite dishes visible from the street? It's a slippery slope to anarchy, Alex. A complete collapse of civilized living." I felt a vein begin to throb in my temple. "I can assure you, Brenda, my mailbox is not a gateway drug to lawn gnomes." "I'm glad to hear it," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "You have 7 days to rectify the violations. The clock is ticking." She picked up her mister and turned back to her petunias, the universal sign for, "This conversation is over." I stood there for a moment, clutching the letter. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of it was staggering. I was a man who dealt with state secrets, with whispers of coups and covert operations. My brain was a fortress of classified information. And, I was being outmaneuvered by a suburban despot whose greatest enemy was a semi-gloss finish. I retreated, defeated and fuming. My first instinct was to fight, to hire a lawyer, to find a loophole in the CC and Rs. But I had a brief to write on Iranian naval movements. I had actual, real-world problems to deal with, so I made a decision. A fatal, catastrophic, world-altering decision. I decided to ignore it. For a few glorious days, nothing happened. I threw myself into my work, analyzing the data from Station Kilo, piecing together the puzzle of Iran's intentions. I felt the familiar thrill of the hunt, the intellectual charge of connecting disparate pieces of information into a coherent picture. The world of Harmony Creek Estates and its tyrannical overlord faded into the background. The mail carrier, a cheerful woman named Carol, continued to deliver my mail without any apparent aesthetic distress. This included my daily classified packet, a deceptively plain manila envelope that was, in reality, one of the most important pieces of paper on the entire continent. It arrived like clockwork, and life went on. I had almost forgotten about Brenda's laminated declaration of war. Then came the morning of day 8. I woke up, poured my coffee, and walked to the front door, expecting to see the manila envelope in the box. I stopped dead on my porch. My coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. Where yesterday there had been a clear, unobstructed path to my mailbox, there was now a boulder. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a large stone. It was a full-fledged, honest-to-God boulder. It was the size of a small armchair, a pockmarked gray behemoth of pure geological spite. It had been professionally placed, likely with a crane, directly in front of my mailbox, leaving only a few inches of clearance. To complete the look, Brenda had flanked it with 2 of the thorniest, most aggressive-looking rose bushes I had ever seen. They were less like plants and more like vegetative barbed wire. My mailbox was now a fortress, and I was on the outside. Taped to the boulder was a small plastic slip from the USPS. Delivery attempt failed. Mailbox obstructed. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my coffee-addled brain. My packet. The daily briefing packet from Thompson was in that mail truck, now undeliverable. This wasn't junk mail or a bill for my internet service. This was the raw intelligence Thompson needed for the 0800 briefing. This was the information that could de-escalate a potential war. I whipped out my phone and called Thompson's secure line. "Jensen?" he answered, no preamble. "Sir, we have a problem with the packet." "What kind of problem?" His voice was flat, but I could hear the underlying tension. "It's obstructed." "Obstructed? Alex, this isn't a pizza delivery. These are bonded couriers. What does obstructed mean?" "How do you explain to the Director of Intelligence Analysis that the nation's security has been thwarted by a decorative rock and some vindictive shrubbery?" "There is a physical impediment, sir. A new landscape feature has appeared." "Get rid of it," he said, his voice dangerously low. "I don't care if you have to use a crowbar or a tactical nuke. Get that packet. You have 1 hour." The line went dead. A tactical nuke was starting to sound reasonable. Desperate, I turned to the modern man's last resort: Craigslist. I searched for landscaper, boulder removal, emergency rock moving, anything. I found an ad with a picture of a smiling, bearded guy leaning against a palm tree. The ad read, "Zen Garden Solutions. We don't fight nature, we flow with it. Call Dave." He sounded like the opposite of a tactical nuke, but he was available immediately. 20 minutes later, a beat-up pickup truck that looked like it ran on patchouli and good vibes pulled up. Out hopped Dave. He had a man bun, Birkenstocks, and an aura of profound calm that I found immediately infuriating. I pointed at the boulder. "Dave, I need that gone, all of it, as soon as possible." Dave walked over to the boulder, placing a hand on it reverently. He closed his eyes. Whoa, man, he breathed. Get rid of it is such a negative vibe. This boulder has energy, it has a story, it wants to be here. I'm sure it does, I said through gritted teeth. But I have a very, very important subscription that I can't miss. It's behind the rock. Can you move it? He opened his eyes and looked at me, a beatific smile on his face. Move it? Why fight the flow, brother? What I'm seeing here is a chance to create harmony, a Zen garden concept. We don't move the boulder, we incorporate it. We celebrate its presence. Maybe some nice white river stones, a little bamboo feature to the side, a path that meanders. Dave, I interrupted, my voice rising. I don't need spiritual enlightenment. I need access. I need a clear, straight line to that metal box. This is a time-sensitive, mission-critical knitting pattern delivery. He seemed disappointed in my lack of vision, but a job was a job. All right, man. If you want to fight the universe, I can do that. But it's gonna cost you. For the next hour, Dave didn't so much move the boulder as he negotiated with it. He used a series of planks, some rollers, and a lot of meditative grunting. He didn't get rid of it. Instead, he created what he called a journey path. It was a winding, ludicrous trail of mismatched pebbles that snaked around the boulder and between the thorny rose bushes. It looked less like a path and more like a sobriety test designed by a sadist. Navigating it took a full minute and required the dexterity of a mountain goat. From her window across the street, I could see Brenda watching, a smug, triumphant smirk plastered on her face. She had won this round. Just as Dave was packing up his truck, Carol the mail carrier came by on her route. She pulled up, took one look at the winding pebble path, the menacing boulder, and the thorny bushes, and just shook her head. She didn't even get out of her truck. She slapped another "delivery failed" notice onto the boulder and drove off. My phone rang. It was Thompson. Jensen, status. I looked at the Zen garden from hell, the boulder standing proud like a monument to my failure. Sir, I said, my voice heavy with defeat. The packet is still inaccessible. The situation on the ground has evolved. The silence on the other end of the line was heavier than the boulder. The East Asia brief was in that packet, Alex. The one about the submarine movements. This is no longer a simple delay. You are now officially interfering with the national security of the United States. The line went dead. I stood there, surrounded by pebbles and thorns, a single thought echoing in my mind. I was going to be the first person in history to go to federal prison over an HOA dispute. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. Sleep had been a series of stress dreams featuring a giant, laughing Brenda chasing me through a labyrinth of thorny bushes. The pressure from Thompson felt like a physical weight on my chest. I was running on fumes, caffeine, and pure, unadulterated panic. Logic had failed. Professional help had failed. It was time for desperate measures. I went to the garage and found a long, heavy-duty crowbar I'd bought years ago and never used. This was its moment to shine. I marched out to the front lawn, the cool morning air doing nothing to calm the frantic hummingbird that was my heart. The boulder sat there, mocking me. Okay, you geological menace, I muttered. It's you and me. I wedged the crowbar under the edge of the boulder and pushed. Nothing. I repositioned it, found a better angle, and threw my entire body weight into it. The boulder groaned, a deep, earthy sound of protest, and shifted. Maybe an inch. Success! A tiny, pathetic victory, but it was a start. Fueled by this minuscule triumph, I gave it another mighty heave. This time I put my back into it. Too much of my back, as it turned out. The boulder tilted, shifted, and then, with a sickening lurch, rolled off the curb and onto my lawn. I felt a sharp, searing pain shoot up my wrist as I stumbled backward to avoid being crushed. I landed hard on the grass, my wrist screaming in agony. But the boulder was off the curb. The path to the mailbox was, well, it was now blocked by the boulder in a slightly different location, but progress. My celebration was cut short by a sound I was coming to dread. A sharp, cracking noise followed by the hiss of spraying water. In its triumphant roll, the boulder had landed directly on top of a sprinkler head, crushing it completely. A geyser of cold water shot 10 feet into the air, creating a beautiful arcing rainbow of my own impending doom. And then, as if on cue, I heard a voice from across the street. "Vandalism! He's destroying property! I'm calling the police!" Of course she was. Brenda was standing on her porch, phone already pressed to her ear, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. I was now a vandal, a destroyer of my own lawn, which, as a reminder, was also under her jurisdiction. I lay on my soaking wet grass, clutching my sprained wrist, as the first sirens wailed in the distance. This was fine. Everything was fine. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up. Out stepped 2 officers. The first was Officer Miller, a man in his late 50s with a magnificent mustache and eyes that held the weary resignation of someone who had seen every form of human stupidity imaginable. The second was Officer Richards, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, with a fresh-out-of-the-academy haircut and an earnest, eager expression that I knew the world would soon crush. Miller surveyed the scene. Me, soaked and nursing my wrist, the geyser of water creating a new pond on my lawn, the massive boulder sitting in a crater of its own making. He sighed, a deep, profound sound that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 domestic disputes. Brenda marched over, clipboard in hand, ready to give her statement. "Officers, thank you for your prompt response. I witnessed the whole thing. He deliberately vandalized HOA common property." Richards, ever the diligent rookie, got his notepad out. "Ma'am, what common property are you referring to?" "The landscape feature!" she screeched, pointing a trembling finger at the boulder. "It was a beautification project, and he destroyed his own sprinkler system, which is a violation of the water conservation bylaw." Miller turned his tired eyes to me. "Son, you want to tell me what's going on here?" "She blocked my mailbox with that rock, officer," I said, getting to my feet. "I have to get my mail. It's urgent." Richards perked up. "What's so urgent about your mail, sir?" This was the tricky part. I couldn't exactly say. It contained sensitive, compartmented information that could prevent a geopolitical crisis. I subscribe to a magazine," I stammered. "A very exclusive one, with time-sensitive knitting patterns." Richards's face fell. "Knitting patterns?" "Very, very important knitting patterns," I insisted, a note of desperation creeping into my voice. "It's for a national competition. Lives could be at stake. The integrity of a cable-knit sweater hangs in the balance." Miller just stared at me. He'd seen it all, but I think national security knitting was a new one for him. He turned to Brenda. "Ma'am, did you put the rock there?" "I installed a landscape feature to encourage compliance with community standards," she said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. Miller pinched the bridge of his nose, right below his magnificent mustache. "So, let me get this straight," he said to Richards, though it was more for his own sanity. "She put a rock in front of his mailbox because it was the wrong color. He tried to move the rock to get his knitting magazines, hurt himself, and broke a sprinkler. And now we're here." "That about sums it up, officer," I said, wincing as I tried to flex my wrist. The cops were completely baffled. "It was a civil matter," they explained. "A dispute for the HOA to sort out. They couldn't force Brenda to move the rock, and they couldn't arrest me for breaking my own sprinkler. They gave us both a stern warning to be more neighborly, a phrase that in this context was so unhelpful, it was almost comical. They left, looking back at the scene with a shared expression of profound confusion. I was left alone, standing in a rapidly growing mud pit with a sprained wrist, a new water feature, and still no mail. My phone buzzed. I didn't need to look. It was Thompson. I let it go to voicemail. I already knew what it would say. I had failed. Logic had failed. My own brute force had failed. It was time to call in the big guns. No more Zen landscapers. I needed a professional. I needed someone whose vocabulary did not include the words harmony or flow. I found a company in the online yellow pages called Tough Guys Demolition and Removal. Their logo was a bulldog wearing a hard hat. This was promising. I called, and a gravelly voice answered, "Gus." I explained the situation, leaving out the national security parts and focusing on the big, ugly rock that needed to disappear. "You got it, boss," Gus grunted. "Be there in an hour." An hour later, a monstrous pickup truck, jacked up so high it probably had its own weather system, pulled into my cul-de-sac. It was towing a trailer with a bright yellow mini-excavator perched on it. Out of the truck stepped Gus. He was a barrel-chested man with a thick neck and arms that looked like they wrestled bears for fun. He was chewing on a toothpick and had a tattoo of a flaming skull on his forearm. He was perfect. He took one look at the boulder, the geyser, and the general state of chaos on my lawn, and let out a low whistle. "Heck of a party. You the guy with the rock problem?" "That's me," I said, my hopes soaring. "I need that boulder gone. Vanished. I don't want to see it ever again." Gus cracked his knuckles. "You got it. You want it gone, or you want it in her living room?" He jerked a thumb toward Brenda's house, where she was, naturally, watching from behind her pristine curtains. "'Cause for an extra 50, I can make that happen." Tempting, I admitted. Deeply, deeply tempting. But gone will suffice for now. "Your funeral?" He shrugged, and then he climbed into the cockpit of the mini-excavator. He fired it up with a roar that shook the very foundations of Harmony Creek Estates. This was the ballet of destruction I had been craving. The first part of the operation was flawless. Gus expertly maneuvered the excavator's arm, clamped the bucket onto the boulder, and lifted it as if it were a pebble. It was a beautiful sight. He swung it around to place it on his trailer. This is where things went wrong. He misjudged the swing, just slightly. The massive boulder dangling from the excavator's arm clipped the top of my already damaged mailbox post. There was a sickening crunch of metal. The post sheared off at the base, and the mailbox itself, my sacred vessel of national secrets, was launched into the air. It flew in a perfect, tragic arc before landing with a hollow clang in the middle of the street. "Whoops," Gus muttered. He tried to correct, to quickly lower the boulder, but his sudden movement caused the excavator to lurch forward. One of its heavy treads dug deep into the soft, waterlogged turf of my lawn. And it found something. It found the main water line for the entire cul-de-sac. The sprinkler geyser had been a squirt gun. This was a tidal wave. A massive eruption of pressurized water exploded from the ground, shooting 20, 30 feet into the air. It wasn't a fountain. It was an Old Testament flood. Water cascaded everywhere. My lawn instantly became a lake. The street became a river, and Brenda's award-winning petunia bed, located at a slightly lower elevation, became a swamp. The water hit her yard like a tsunami, a muddy torrent that ripped her precious flowers from the soil and turned her perfect lawn into a murky brown soup. The entire neighborhood, drawn by the roar of the excavator and the subsequent explosion of water, poured out of their houses. People were filming on their phones. Children were pointing and laughing. It was a full-blown suburban spectacle. Brenda stood on her front porch, her mouth open in a silent scream, her face a mask of pure, apoplectic rage. Gus, standing ankle-deep in the muddy water, turned off the excavator. He looked at the chaos he had wrought. The broken mailbox, the flooded street, Brenda's ruined garden. He took the toothpick out of his mouth. "Well," he said, looking at me with a shrug, "the boulder's gone." My phone rang. It was Thompson. This time I answered. "Don't ask," I said, my voice hollow. "I don't need to ask, Jensen." His voice was dangerously calm. "I'm watching it on CNN. Some local news helicopter is filming your street. Looks like you've declared war on suburbia." My blood ran cold. "It's on the news?" "Mysterious flood baffles upscale neighborhood." That's the Chiron, Alex. My office has been getting calls from local law enforcement. Apparently, there's a national knitting emergency underway at your house. Before I could respond, I saw it. Gliding down the street, parting the waters of the great flood of Harmony Creek, like a shark parting the sea, was a vehicle that did not belong here. It was a black, government-issue Chevrolet Suburban with tinted windows so dark they seemed to absorb the light. It moved with an unnatural silence, its presence immediately sucking the levity out of the atmosphere. The Suburban pulled to a stop. The driver's side and passenger side doors opened in perfect sync. Out stepped two men. They were identical in their immaculate charcoal gray suits, crisp white shirts, and thin black ties. They had bland, forgettable faces, generic haircuts, and an unnerving calmness. They radiated an aura of absolute, humorless authority. They were the kind of men who show up when things have gone catastrophically, apocalyptically wrong. They surveyed the scene, the gushing water main, the excavator sitting in a mud pit, my mailbox lying forlornly in the street, Brenda shrieking on her porch, Gus looking sheepish, and me standing there looking like a drowned rat who had just lost a fight with a rock. They didn't look angry. They didn't look surprised. They looked disappointed, like two fathers who had just found out their son had burned down the school. The men in black suits, let's call them Agent Smith and Agent Jones, because they looked exactly like you'd imagine, walked toward the epicenter of the chaos. The crowd of neighbors instinctively parted for them. Officers Miller and Richards, who had returned with the fire department, looked profoundly relieved to see them, as if a higher power had finally arrived to take this mess off their hands. Brenda, spotting their official-looking demeanor, saw her chance. She stomped down her porch steps, her shoes squelching in the mud, and intercepted them. "Thank God!" she cried, her voice cracking. "Are you from the National HOA Oversight Committee? Or the EPA? I have filed 3 complaints about this man. He is a menace." Agent Smith, the slightly taller of the two, gave her a blank, unblinking stare. It was a look so devoid of emotion it was almost inhuman. "Ma'am, we are here about a communications disruption. At this address." He gestured with a subtle flick of his head toward my ruined property. "Disruption?" Brenda shrieked. "He destroyed my petunias. My prize-winning petunias. That's a horticultural atrocity." Agent Jones, who hadn't spoken a word, lifted his wrist and spoke quietly into his watch. "Package is still unsecured. Asset is compromised. Site is wet." Smith finally turned his attention to me. He walked over, his expensive leather shoes sinking slightly into the mud without him so much as flinching. He stopped in front of me. Gus, the tough guy demolition expert, took one look at him and suddenly seemed very interested in checking the tire pressure on his truck. "Mr. Jensen?" Smith asked. His voice was a monotone, devoid of inflection. "That's me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. My sprained wrist throbbed. I suddenly felt very underdressed in my muddy jeans and t-shirt. He leaned in closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Mr. Jensen, I'm Agent Smith. This is Agent Jones. We've been monitoring this situation with increasing concern." "You and me both," I muttered. A flicker of something. Maybe annoyance, maybe the human equivalent of a blue screen of death passed through his eyes. Your failure to retrieve 3 consecutive daily briefings has triggered a silent sentinel protocol. That's a level 4 alert. My stomach dropped. I knew what that meant. It meant an asset was presumed to be captured, dead or turned. He continued, his voice a low hum. Foreign intelligence services, specifically the SVR and China's MSS, have algorithms that monitor for these kinds of disruptions. A sudden, 3-day communications blackout from a known remote analysis node like yours is a massive red flag. They've flagged this address for a potential asset disruption. They think something has happened to you. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. They may be planning to send their own landscapers to investigate, and their methods of inquiry are less subtle than ours. I stared at him, my mind reeling. My petty war with Brenda, my stupid suburban feud over a mailbox. It had escalated. It had gone from a local joke to a cable news story to an honest-to-God international incident. The Russians and the Chinese might be sending spies to my cul-de-sac. "You're kidding me," I breathed. Agent Smith's face was a mask of pure, unadulterated seriousness. "We do not kid, Mr. Jensen. Director Thompson sends his regards. The president was briefed on your mailbox situation 30 minutes ago." He gestured around at the flooded street, the gawking neighbors, the fire trucks. This cul-de-sac is now a matter of national security. He looked at the muddy hole where my mailbox used to be. Then he looked at Brenda, who was now arguing with a firefighter. Then he looked back at me. "We're taking over," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Operation Mailbox Freedom is a go." The sun had set on the great flood of Harmony Creek, but a new, stranger day was dawning. As darkness fell, the cul-de-sac was quietly and efficiently locked down. The local police put up "Road closed, water main break" signs at the entrance to the neighborhood, dispersing the last of the curious onlookers. The fire department, having finally located and shut off the main valve, packed up their trucks and left. Gus from Tough Guys Demolition, after a very quiet and one-sided conversation with Agent Jones, had hastily loaded his excavator and vanished into the night without ever asking for payment. Then, the real work began. Around 10 p.m., a plain white van rolled silently down the street. It bore the logo of a non-existent municipal agency, Department of Public Works and Urban Harmony. If you looked closely, you could see it had no license plates, and its tires were far too rugged for a simple work van. It parked in front of my house. Out stepped a team of 4 technicians. They wore dark blue coveralls and moved with a silent, purposeful efficiency that was frankly terrifying. They didn't look like city workers. They looked like a SEAL team that had decided to take up landscaping as a hobby. Smith and Jones stood on the sidewalk, directing the operation with subtle hand gestures and quiet murmurs. What followed was the most impressive display of problem-solving I had ever witnessed. One team immediately got to work on the broken water main. They didn't just patch it. They excavated a neat, precise square, replaced an entire section of pipe with what looked like space-age polymers, and used some kind of rapid-set compound to fill the hole. Another team focused on my lawn. They used powerful, quiet pumps to drain the standing water into the storm drains. Then they rolled out fresh, perfect squares of sod, laying them down with geometric precision. Within 2 hours, my muddy swamp was gone, replaced by a lawn so perfect it made Brenda's look like a vacant lot. They even repaired the damage to her petunia bed, replacing the drowned flowers with identical healthy ones they must have brought with them. It was horticultural espionage. The main event, however, was the mailbox. They didn't just put the old one back. They excavated a deep, 3-foot square hole where my old post had been. Into this, they lowered a thick, reinforced steel pillar and secured it with a fast-curing concrete that steamed faintly in the cool night air. Then, they affixed the new mailbox. It looked, to the casual observer, exactly like my old one. It was painted in a perfect, blemish-free coat of midnight shadow satin black. The flag was a gentle, aesthetically pleasing curved model, but I saw them connect a thick, shielded cable that ran from the post underground toward my house. I saw the glint of what looked like a reinforced locking mechanism. This wasn't a mailbox. It was a secure drop box. It was the Fort Knox of mail receptacles. It was probably bomb-proof, and I had no doubt it contained its own climate control system and a direct line to NORAD. By 3 a.m., they were done. The van, the technicians, all of it vanished as silently as it had arrived. The street was dry. My lawn was perfect. The new mailbox stood proud and tall, a monument to federal overcorrection. It was the most beautiful, intimidating, and deeply compliant thing I had ever seen. The only evidence that anything had happened were the "road closed" signs, which Smith and Jones quietly removed before getting back into their black Suburban to watch the sun rise. The next morning, I walked outside with a sense of trepidation and awe. The world was clean. It was quiet. It was as if the chaos of the previous day had been nothing but a fever dream. Just then, Carol the mail carrier's truck rounded the corner. She slowed down, her eyes wide as she took in the miraculously restored scene. Agent Jones, who had seemingly materialized from the morning mist, stepped forward and gave her a polite nod. He personally escorted the nervous mail carrier to the new installation. She deposited a single, familiar manila envelope, gave a weak smile, and all but ran back to her truck. I walked to the mailbox. The metal felt cool and solid under my hand. The door opened with a satisfying, well-oiled thunk. I retrieved my packet, my first in 4 days. The relief was immense. But, of course, the moment could not last. "What is the meaning of this?" The shriek cut through the tranquil morning air. Brenda was storming across her perfect lawn, a fresh clipboard in her hand, her face a thundercloud of fury. She had found a new violation. "You can't just install a new mailbox without a vote from the Architectural Review Committee," she yelled, closing the distance between us. "That requires Form 11C, a materials submission, and a neighborhood impact statement. I'm writing you up for an unauthorized installation." She was 10 feet away, poised for the final, climactic battle. But she never made it. Agent Smith stepped out from behind a perfectly pruned maple tree on my lawn, appearing as if from nowhere. He was holding a coffee cup and smiling a thin, bloodless smile that did not reach his eyes. "Brenda, is it?" he asked, his voice calm and pleasant. She stopped short, startled. "Yes. And who are you?" "Agent Smith," he said, taking a sip of his coffee. "We're from the Federal Communications and Structures Commission, the FCSC." He'd invented an entire federal agency just for this conversation. "This installation," he said, gesturing to the mailbox, "is a pilot program for enhancing postal security and promoting community beautification. We selected your exemplary neighborhood for the beta test." Brenda was flustered, her momentum gone. "Federal? I wasn't notified." "It's a matter of national importance," Smith said, his eyes twinkling with something that definitely wasn't mirth. "We've reviewed your HOA's bylaws. Meticulous work, truly. Your dedication to compliance is frankly inspiring to us at the federal level. A true patriot." Brenda preened slightly, her anger momentarily forgotten in the face of this high-level praise. "Well, we do our best to maintain standards." "You do more than that," Smith continued, his voice silky smooth. "Which is why you, of all people, will appreciate this. This mailbox exceeds every single one of your standards by a factor of 12. Its setback is precise to the millimeter. Its paint is a specially formulated, military-grade satin that actively repels visual disharmony. The flagging mechanism was designed by a team at MIT to achieve the perfect ergonomic and aesthetic curve." Brenda was speechless. She looked at the mailbox, then back at Smith, her brain struggling to process this. "Oh, well, in that case..." Smith took a small step closer. His smile vanished. "Your civic-mindedness has been noted at the highest levels, Brenda, but for the pilot program to be a success, this particular landscape feature requires zero interaction from anyone. It's vital for us to collect our data uninterrupted." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "We wouldn't want any local interference to be misinterpreted, would we? That could have repercussions." The way he said repercussions made the air grow cold. It was a word that carried an unspoken weight of black vans, legal troubles, and endless, soul-crushing audits from agencies she'd never even heard of. Brenda's face went pale. The clipboard slipped from her fingers and landed softly on the perfect grass. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely, utterly terrified. She understood, in that moment, that she had been playing checkers, and she had just tried to write a ticket to a grandmaster of chess. She had flown too close to the sun, and the sun was wearing a charcoal gray suit and drinking coffee on my lawn. She just nodded, a jerky, spastic movement. She turned without another word, her posture no longer that of a tyrant, but of a mouse fleeing a hawk, and scurried back to the safety of her beige castle. Agent Smith watched her go, then turned to me and winked. It was the single most unsettling gesture I have ever witnessed. Then he and Jones got into their Suburban and drove away, leaving me alone in the silent, peaceful, and now deeply intimidating cul-de-sac. Life in Harmony Creek Estates found a new, stranger normal. The neighbors stopped asking questions, content to whisper theories about the Witness Protection Program or a secret government experiment. Brenda avoided me entirely. If she saw me coming, she would abruptly turn and walk the other way, or dive into her garage. The reign of terror was over. I got my packets on time every time. The world was safe from Iranian fleets and Chinese submarines, all thanks to Operation Mailbox Freedom. About a week later, I found another laminated letter taped to my front door. My heart, out of pure instinct, sank. I braced myself for a new, unforeseen violation. Maybe the blades of my grass were now a non-compliant height. But it wasn't a violation. It was an official notice from the HOA's Beautification Committee, signed by Brenda herself. My property had been awarded Yard of the Month. I read the letter, my jaw slack. It praised my swift and decisive action in rectifying the previous landscaping issues. It went on to compliment, in glowing terms, the exceptional, harmonious, and deeply compliant nature of the new mailbox installation, which serves as a shining example for the entire community. I stood there, on my pristine, federally installed lawn, holding the award letter. I looked at my bomb-proof, spy-proof, HOA-proof mailbox. I looked back at the letter, at Brenda's shaky, defeated signature at the bottom, and I threw my head back and laughed. It was a deep, genuine, and slightly hysterical laugh. I walked inside, poured myself a very large glass of whiskey, and sat down in my office. The manila envelope was on my desk. I opened it, took out the day's secrets, and began to read. The world was as dangerous as ever, but for the first time in a long time, my little corner of it was perfectly, beautifully, and securely in compliance.